everybody. Welcome back to A Night Divided. We are going to be reading chapter 4 today. So if you haven't read chapters 1 through 3, you need to stop this video, go back, watch them, get caught up. So we left off with the wall has started going up in Berlin, dividing into east and west. So now we're going to see what's going to happen with Gerda and Fritz and Mama being stuck on one side, and Papa and the brother and Dominic on the other side. So they've been separated. So now let's see what happens. All right, we are starting with chapter 4. That's on page 17. The quote at the top says, "The eye looks, but it is the mind that sees." Mama once said that the most wonderful thing about being young is our ability to make things normal. That whatever life does to us, no matter how strange, it isn't long before insanity seems ordinary, as if upside down is the way things should be. That didn't make sense to me at first, but over the next 4 years after the wall went up, I saw it happen more and more. Most children barely noticed the wall anymore. They played hoops beneath the eyes of the armed border guards in their watchtowers, rolled marbles in the shade of the wall, and learned to do as they were told without asking questions. I was 12 years old now, and the older I got, the more separate I felt from the other kids my age. Because I always noticed the wall. Always. Over the past 4 years, I had learned to read the guards high up in the watchtowers and know when they were looking and when they had turned away. I knew when and where the guards did their patrols along the border and where they didn't often go. And more than anything, I knew that nothing happening to us was normal. The only one who really understood that was Fritz, who said it was because I had Papa's blood in me. Not a single morning had passed in the last 4 years that I didn't think of my father and the courage he would expect from me. My walk to school passed very close to the wall, or as close as we were allowed to get anyway. I usually made the walk alongside my only friend, Anna, who was as timid and shy as I was bold and outspoken. Where I had blonde hair, round eyes, and an athlete body, Anna had darker hair, eyes that nearly disappeared when she smiled, and a thin frame that looked as if she needed to be fed. She worked very hard to stay out of trouble, which made her an ideal friend for me. Unfortunately, my ability to avoid trouble was less likely. I probably wasn't the perfect friend for her. Today was uncommonly cold. I was enduring it and hoping not to arrive at school frostbitten. As usual between us, Anna made the wiser choice. She was wrapped in scarves until there wasn't much visible except for her eyes and mouth. I barely remembered my coat. "There's a pioneer meeting today," Anna said through what looked like 18 layers of wool. "Are you going?" I groaned. We went to school to study letters and numbers, and then stayed at school as members of the Pioneers, and learned why freedom was overrated, why individuality was bad, and why we must always avoid the evil influences of the West, such as fancy clothes and Beatles music. I love the Beatles, but not even Anna knew that. That secret was only for Fritz and me, and he had bought one of their albums smuggling in from the black market, and he and I listened to it on low nights when the streets were crowded and noisy. "Of course I'm coming," I said. Not attending would bring my mother a visit from the school administrators, and none of us wanted that. Over the last 4 years, we had already had too many questions from the school, the police, even the Stasi about my father. Nothing in East Germany frightened me more than the Stasi. We always knew they were there, even when we couldn't see them. They existed to protect our country from enemies, either foreign spies trying to get in or traitors who wanted to get out. My family wasn't either, but that didn't mean we were safe. After my father left, I had thought there would be no need for them to visit us anymore, but they obviously disagreed. They had last come almost 2 years ago, late at night, long after we should have been in bed. I think their timing was meant to make us nervous, and from the looks on my family's faces, it worked. Fritz and I had sat on either side of Mama on the couch while she answered their questions. I kept an eye on their weapons. If they'd only come to ask questions, then why did they bring guns? The Stasi officer who had sat in Papa's old chair was on his second cigarette before the hard questions came. "Has Aldous Lowell returned to the East Berlin?" I was sure I could hear Mama's heart pounding beside me, or maybe it was mine because the officer's tone made it clear that he was no friend to my father. Mama shook her head, and she was trying to answer in a calm voice. It didn't work. I have not seen my husband since the wall went up. Good, the officer said. We will arrest him if he does return. He took a long drag on his cigarette. Does he continue to work against the government? He never did, Mama said. Another man who had stood by the door walked forward with photos that he placed in her hands. I leaned over just enough to see an old picture of my father and Hera Cruz, both with stacks of leaflets in their hands. I didn't know what was on them, but from the terse expression on the officer's face, it was obviously something more than a party invitation or store coupons. Mama quickly handed the photos back. I have no idea what my husband is doing now. He does not involve us in those activities. And never did. He never involved Mama or me, but Fritz hadn't looked at the pictures, and I wonder if it was because he already knew what my father had been doing. Has Aldous Lowell tried to contact you? The officer asked. Mama shook her head, but when she paused for too long, I spoke for her. We have no letters, and you cut the phone lines to the west on barbed wire Sunday. The officer turned his attention to me. His eyes were like ice on my bare skin. I cut some of them myself, child. Does that anger you? Of course it angered me. But he had the gun. So I only looked down while Mama made humble apologies for my boldness and gripped my wrist like a vice. The Stasi left soon afterward, but even now, 2 years later, I still felt a chill whenever I thought of them. Since that night, Mama carefully made sure we did everything that might be expected of a good East German family. We waved our flags at the parades and smiled at the leaders of the GDR, the German Democratic Republic, our communist government. Fritz joined the Free German Youth and made plans to enroll at the university one day. And at the beginning of every school year, I joined the Pioneers. With Anna by my side, I participated in their meetings and activities, chanted the slogan, "Be ready, always ready," and wore the blue scarf and white shirt uniform on every holiday when it was required. If anyone was watching us, and we suspected they were, my family now looked as loyal as the best of them. Gerda, stop staring at the wall, Anna whispered to me. Do you think the soldiers don't notice you? I think it's too cold for them to bother with me, I said. They watch the university students and the men whose families are on the other side. They don't watch 12-year-old girls on their way to school. Yes, they do, Anna insisted. Turn away, please. Look at anything else. At what? I gestured around me. There's nothing to see. And with all the gray around us, it's hard to remember that we live in a world of color. We called it the communist gray. It was the color of most of our buildings and markets and streets, the color of the wall. Even the skies were gray today. Somehow, the GDR must have figured out how to bleach that out too. But because I knew it bothered Anna, I stopped looking, and she and I fell into a conversation about the latest hair fashions. It was the sort of conversation two ordinary girls might have on a perfectly ordinary day, even if one of those girls had her mind on something else entirely, as I almost always did. I became so distracted by my thoughts, in fact, that I barely noticed when Anna stopped talking. I probably wouldn't have realized she had stopped walking either if she hadn't spoken my name. Gerda, look. I stopped and turned back to her. To my surprise, Anna stood directly facing the wall. Gerda, is that your brother? Several meters away, across a large scar of land that had become the forbidden territory, a boy stood alone on a platform behind the wall in West Berlin. I usually try to ignore the Westerners on those platforms because they made me feel like an exhibit in the zoo. I didn't want their looks of pity or sadness, or especially the occasional homesick expression to return to this lesser half of the city. But the boy on the platform seemed to be staring directly at me, and I squinted to see him better. It had been 4 years since I'd seen Dominic, and he had He would be 14 now. Mama kept a picture of him in the front room, and I mentally compared that with the boy now facing me. His face had lengthened and narrowed, but the hair peeking out from his knitted cap seemed to be about the right color. I would know him if I saw his eyes, but that was impossible from this distance. Still, there was something in his posture, the way he held one shoulder higher than the other. Dominic used to do that. I remember because my mother always reminded him to stand up straight. It had been a long time since my smile had stretched so wide. "That's him," I said. "That's my brother." He seemed to recognize me too, or at least he waved. I raised my hand back at him, although it was a simple gesture that was far too casual for the importance of this matter. For almost 4 years, neither of us had heard a word about the other, and now all we could do was wave in silence. "Does something over there interest you?" I turned to see a border guard standing right behind Anna and me, close enough that I could see the stitching on his black gloves. He was shorter than average, with white blonde hair shaved so close to his head that he almost looked bald. He was several years older than Fritz, but there were a lot of patches on his uniform, so I gathered he was more than a low-level officer. His name, stitched into the uniform, was Mueller, and he stared down as if frightening me entertained him. Mueller had come up so quickly that neither of us heard him, but I should have known. Grinzers often patrolled this area. Of course, my wave to Dominic would have caught one's attention. Beside me, Anna had turned to stone, or something like it. She wasn't moving, and possibly wasn't breathing either. Not me. I wanted to look up as far as his eyes, stare him in the face, and tell him that there was no crime in looking across the wall. More than anything, I wanted to show him that I wasn't afraid. Except that I was. Mueller's rifle hung around his shoulders directly in front of me, and he had one hand on the stock. Maybe it was only my imagination, but I could have sworn that the rifle smelled like blood, as if he had used it on someone before. He lifted it over his head and moved his other hand to the trigger. "I asked you a question," Mueller said. "Who were you waving at?" I turned back, but Dominic had disappeared by then, so I lowered my eyes and said to the officer, "It was nobody, sir." "You better remember that the next time someone over there tries to wave at you." He let the cold metal barrel brush against my cheek and then ran it down my chin and pushed my head up to face him, because those who get too curious about the other side sometimes get a taste of my bullets. Vicious do? I stared into his icy blue eyes and tried not to let my hatred show in mine. "Yes," I whispered. "I understand exactly who you are." "Then move along. Don't let me catch you stopping here again." I whispered another thanks to him, which almost immediately began to eat at my sense of justice. Then I grabbed Anna's arm. As terrified as I had been, she seemed worse. Her skin was deathly pale, and she leaned hard against me as she walked away. When Officer Mueller was out of sight, Anna released a gasp of air and then said to me, "Promise me you'll never stop there again, no matter who you see on the other side. Promise me, Gerda." Though her reddened eyes begged me to agree with her, I couldn't. Maybe I could promise to be more careful next time I stopped, but that was all. I didn't tell her that. She'd have launched into a fit of hysterics, which would have brought on Mueller's attention again. So I clutched her arm tighter as we continued to walk. My heart was pounding, just as hers surely was, but for an entirely different reason. All I could think was that after 4 long years, I had finally seen my brother, and I hoped it wouldn't be for the last time. All right, so that's the end of chapter 4. We will pick up on chapter 5 tomorrow. Until then, I want you to think, how would you feel if you haven't been able to see your brother or your father or your mother or your sister or some member of your family that you were used to seeing every day, that you haven't been able to see them for 4 long years? How would you feel if you were just walking to school one day and you happened to see them standing on the other side of the Berlin Wall and just waving at you? How would that make you feel? And then imagine someone telling you, "You can't look over there anymore. Please do not look over there anymore." Would you be able to keep your eyes from straying to the wall? Would you be able to ignore it? Or would you be keeping your eyes constant to the platforms, trying to get a glimpse of that family member? Something to think about.